Our Central Division preview continues. Today, we're going to examine two teams around the middle of the Central Division to determine where each squad stands, who their top players are, and what their outlook is for the upcoming 2024-25 season. All that and more on this episode of Note News. So we're going to continue doing our Central Division preview. If you haven't already, go check out the first episode in this little mini series that we uploaded last week, where we covered what we think will be sort of the basement of the Central Division in the Chicago Blackhawks and the Minnesota Wild. So go check that out if you haven't already. In addition, if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, we'd appreciate if you would do that. Like this video, rate the podcast wherever you're listening, 5 stars, I hope. And we're also on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Note News Pod, so you can follow us along there. We post some cool content on there as well. Alec, how are you feeling about sort of this middle tier of the Central Division? I guess I'm going to sort of show our hand here, but we're going to be covering the Nashville Predators and the Utah Hockey Club today. I think you can make some arguments about whether or not I guess one of these teams should belong in the middle tier or whether they should graduate to the top tier. But I think it's safe to say they'll be sort of at least around the middle is I think what we'll say. So general thoughts on sort of the mid tier of the Central Division, maybe how it compares to the rest of the NHL. Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
I do think that this is probably going to be the level of competition that the Blues are at, that these are kind of the teams that if we are trying to make the playoffs, these are the teams you have to beat and be better than. To me, this kind of feels like around the playoff line in the NHL. Not saying that these are two guaranteed playoff teams, but this is about the caliber of roster you'd need to have a shot at making the playoffs. And in what I think will be a really tough Central Division, we are going to see a lot of these teams, and we do need to beat a lot of these teams. So, yeah, I think they're certainly talented, and I think they're talented enough to, as I've kind of already revealed, probably make the playoffs at least some of the time.
Yeah. Before we sort of get into it, like a little bit of a disclaimer, I personally think that an argument can be made that Nashville belongs in the top tier of the Central Division, and maybe the Winnipeg Jets would move down to the middle tier after the off seasons that these two teams had. But we can get into all of that. But I would agree this is sort of where the Blues are as well. We're not really going to get into the Blues. This is a sort of rest of the Central Division focused episode. But I would agree that this is the range that we're talking about for the Blues, sort of in the middle. Hopeful for the playoffs. There's a scenario where they could make the playoffs, but it's not exactly a guarantee. So do you want to just get right into it? Start with the Nashville Predators?
Let's go.
All right. So I think the Nashville Predators, I think they were sort of lauded as the winners, like the big winners of free agency. They had a very active July 1st, signing multiple big players to some pretty long contracts. And they had a pretty active offseason overall, some trades more recently as well that sort of shake up both the roster and the prospect system for Nashville. They're a team that obviously did make the playoffs last year, ended up losing to the Vancouver Canucks, but I think they've improved pretty notably, at least for next season. We can argue whether these improvements will last for the long term, but I think for the short term, just looking forward to 24-25, they've pretty much improved. So what we'll do first is talk about some additions and subtractions. So leaving the Nashville Predators, they lost Jason Zucker and Kiefer Sherwood to free agency. And then they completed some trades. They traded Cody Glass to Pittsburgh. They traded Ryan McDonough to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then more recently, this has sort of been in sort of a big news piece lately. They traded Yaroslav Askarov to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for, I guess, some, was it picks and prospects, that kind of thing. Yeah, that was arguably one of their bigger trades, if not the biggest of the offseason for them, losing who a lot of people thought would be their goalie of the future. But after they extended Jussi Saros this offseason, that left a little bit of uncertainty on that front. Moving now to the additions. This is sort of the big piece for Nashville's offseason. They signed a lot of big players. I guess these big three that we'll talk about are sort of the big haul, sort of the big fish of free agency, I guess, that the Nashville Predators were able to reel in. So Steven Stamkos, they signed to a 4-year deal at $32 million total. Jonathan Marchessault, 5 years, $27.5 million, and Brady Shea at 7 years and $49 million. They also signed Scott Wedgwood to a 2-year, $3 million contract, so he'll be their backup goalie next season. And then, as I already mentioned, they did sign Jose Saros to an 8-year, $61.92 million contract extension. So that's another big piece of their offseason. So it looks like they're sticking with Saros. He's their guy of the future as well. So this sort of transforms their mostly their top lines, their top defensive pairings. What do you think of the Predators offseason? So, like, how would you rate it? Do you think? I think an argument can be made that they may have overpaid a little for some of those players. But what are your thoughts on the Predators offseason?
Yeah, if I'm looking at their offseason, honestly, I'm going to say that they were a little bit irresponsible. I think they acquired talent, but as you said, they might have overpaid some of that to do so. I mean, a 7-year term for Brady Shea, I think they're really going to be regretting that one down the line. He's still a good player right now, and that's the key here is a lot of these players are still good right now, but this felt like a very all-in offseason from the Predators when they were still kind of in a similar spot as the Blues. Obviously, better roster, had better performance last year. You know, they made the playoffs. We didn't. But only beat us by a couple points in the standings. So pretty close roster-wise. And they decided to go all in, which is going to, you know, if they don't end up winning a Stanley Cup, I'd say in the next probably 2 or 3 years at most, it's probably going to set them back quite a bit. And so, yeah, they I guess, liked what they had and took a risk. And I suppose for Predators fans, that could be fun. But for me personally, as a Blues fan, I think that we actually might be reaping the rewards of this 2-3 years down the line.
Yeah, maybe so. I'd agree that overall they were in a similar position. Like you said, they did make the playoffs. We didn't, but they were in a similar position in terms of like not exactly a clear plan for the future. Like it's not like they were on the rise. Rather, they were sort of looked like they would take a step back. But yeah, it does look like they've pushed their chips in and they're really trying to win in the short term. They might pay for it in the long term, but I think if they do get a cup out of it, they'll say it was worth it. So
For sure.
I guess that goes without saying. But I think I would agree a bit of an overpay. Mostly with the term. I feel like the dollar amounts themselves, you know, is kind of fair. Like I think an average annual value of $8 million for Steven Stamkos. I think that's to be expected for a player like Stammer. 5.5 average annual value for Marchessault, I think is pretty solid, and then an average annual value of $7 million for Brady Shea. I think that's fair for the most part for those players in terms of the figure that you're actually paying them. But like I said, and I think like you were saying as well, the term is sort of what gets you. It's a long time to be paying that much money to that many players. So we'll see how it all plays out. I think they're hoping that this gives them a chance, not just next season, but for the next maybe 2 or 3 years. So we'll have to see what happens with that.
And I think the other part of that, like going all in right now too, is like you look at where their roster was, it was pretty good. And you look at their additions, they're all good players. But even as we look at it on paper, as we're about to get into some of their, you know, top players and whatnot, can you really say that this is a team like on par with a team like the Oilers, the Florida Panthers, the, you know, Canucks Stars or Rangers, like the really cream of the crop of the NHL who are sort of expected to eliminate, you know, some lesser teams? I'm not really sure. Well, maybe I'm revealing what I actually think a little bit, but we'll get into that.
We will. For what it's worth, I think that a lot of the projections do like the Predators as one of the top teams, at least for next year. I think there's also a debate that could be had on that front, but some people do think so. Comparing them with the Blues in particular, like we've mentioned how the Blues don't have that elite level scoring. I think that is something that that the Predators do have for sure. I think they'll be good next year. It's just a matter of whether that will sustain itself. Like I said, they may have been on a downward trajectory, but they're kind of dug their heels in and are trying to win in the short term for sure.
I want to clear up, like, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that they'll be good next year. I just don't
Yeah.
know if I expect them to be on the level of
Sure.
like the Dallas Stars.
Sure. Yeah. I think we can both agree that they would make the playoffs at least.
Most likely.
Is most likely what will happen. And I guess we say anything could happen, but I feel like this past year's playoffs were pretty chalk as far as who did well. Anyways, let's talk a little bit more about their players and the team itself by talking about who their top players are. Let's start with the forward group. Obviously their top forward last year was Filip Forsberg, played all 82 with 48 goals, 46 assists, and 94 points. So excellent season from Forsberg. And I think the main question with him is whether or not he can stick around all season. This was sort of the first time he did it in a while, but when he does, he's pretty good, which is kind of an understatement, I guess. But so I think he was definitely their top forward last year, but with the additions of Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, do you think there is an argument that could be made that maybe one of those two claims that spot as the top forward? Do you think there's maybe even another name in that discussion? What are your thoughts on the forward group?
I think it's still probably Forsberg. I think, like you said, if he stays on the ice, I like his ability better. He's a little bit younger, and also, I think with Stamkos too, we saw a little bit of a kind of a lot. Well, the underlying numbers for Stamkos last year were really not as good, and that was despite Nikita Kucherov just going insane.
Yeah.
Especially on what I'm looking at is 5-on-5 hockey. Stamkos really took a step back. So I think I like Forsberg's like full game better, and also I think he'll probably still be the team leader in points.
I think I'd agree there. Some other names in the forward group to pay attention to are our old friend Ryan O'Reilly.
It still hurts.
It still hurts. It definitely does still hurt. Also, Gustav Nyquist had a pretty decent season last year with 75 points. So a pretty solid forward group, I think you'd say, especially those top two lines. I think will project to be really solid. Let's shift now to the blue line. The top defenseman, I think it's still Roman Josi. Do you think maybe Brady Shea enters that conversation? Anyone else? Like, what do you make of the Predators defense?
Yosi's still the guy. I mean, Shea's a good player. He's actually a player I kind of wanted the Blues to target, although not nearly at what he got from the Predators. Yeah, Josi will definitely be their number one defenseman, and I actually think there's a pretty solid chance that he's going to lead this team in points. He's really, I feel like in the last couple of years, really leaned more into his offensive toolkit, sort of sacrificing defense a little bit to really get set up in the offensive zone more. And yeah, the points are going to be there for Roman Josi, and I think this is potentially could even be a career year for him points wise. Although his overall NHL play, in my opinion, might decline. Yosi's a threat.
For sure. That's interesting. I feel like you've maybe been a little more critical of Josi on the podcast before, but
I definitely am a little bit of a Josi like detractor. He's still a very, very good player. Don't get me wrong. definitely, almost definitely. I'd have to think about it again, but like I'm almost certain a top 10 defenseman.
Oh yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, I'd agree. I think he's still the top guy. I'll be interested to see what Brady Shea can do and whether he can play up to that contract for its entirety. 7 years, like you said, is a long time, so we'll have to see what happens with that. Obviously, the top goalie remains to be Jussi Saros. No change there. He had a really good year last year with 64 games played, save percentage of 906, which was a little bit save percentage wise a little bit down from his career norms, but I think he's still one of the premier goalies in the NHL, and I think he's still gonna. I think he's still going to be good, which is a bummer.
it's so annoying. It's like a constant in my lifetime is, you know, death taxes and the Nashville Predators having a top 10 goalie
Yeah,
every year.
yeah. Where the discussion, I guess, gets a little more interesting since there is no changing of the guard with that top goalie spot is the backup spot. Um, obviously, they brought in Scott Wedgwood.
Excuse me.
Do you think it is a downgrade? Like in that backup spot, do you have any thoughts with that backup goalie spot since that's where the change is happening for the Predators?
Honestly, I think the Predators aren't really thinking about their backup goalie that much. Saros is their guy, and not only that, but they're going to like lean on him a lot. They have a solid defense, I'll say, but I don't think they have like a unbelievable defense. Um, and their backup last year, Kevin Lankinen, was kind of fine. And I'd say, for the coming year, Scott Wedgwood will probably be okay. And I think they're fine with that. With the team going all in, they were trying to save a little bit of money where they could. And I think they're okay having backup goalie not be one of their strengths.
Yeah, I'd agree that they're going to lean on him. Just looking at like the last three, let me just read these numbers to you. The last three seasons, Saros played in 2021, 22, 67 games, 22, 23, 64 games, and then last year, 23, 24, 64 games. They are definitely riding that hand of Jussi Saros. He also led the league, I believe, in games played. All three of those years, and then the past 2 years has led the league in shots against and in saves. It looks like so a really good string of seasons from Saros. Also, he's finished in the top six in Vezina voting in each of the past 4 seasons. So let me just break this down for you. In 2021, he was finished sixth in Vezina voting. 21-22, third. 22-23, fourth, and then last year 23-24, he finished fifth. So he's been good for a few seasons now. I think he'll continue to be pretty good. I would say I would describe as pretty good, maybe even very good. Which going back to the bold takes episode. Let's shift now to talking about their prospect system, which I think is sort of, I would describe it as maybe middling. I don't think it's terrible. I think it is right around the middle of the NHL is sort of what I've heard and what I would say. They obviously lost Yaroslav Askarov. They traded him away, so that does shake things up in their prospect system. But they brought back David Edstrom, right? So I think with Edstrom, Luke Evangelista, Yegor Surin, are there any names that you like in their prospect system or any names that you think could make an impact in the upcoming 2024-25 season?
In the upcoming season, it feels like most of their prospects are more developmental guys, and I think that's probably to be expected for a like all-in team. I guess you could probably say Nick Blankenberg will probably get some time if he someone else falls out of the rotation or whatever. And he's, I think, a fine prospect. I'm not really sure that I'm all that high on him, but I think he could make an impact. And I agree. I would say their prospect pool is kind of fine. They've got like okay talent. Nothing really super high end, although I will say I did really, really like their draft this year, which is just annoying. Because of course I did, because it's the Nashville Predators, and yeah, I can't escape them. But yeah, I mean, Igor Surin, Teddy Stiga, two players I really liked. I think Viggo Gustafsson, which I believe are their first 3 picks, all players that I liked as prospects, and I'd say the first 2 are probably going to make the NHL at some level. But yeah, in terms of next season, I think it's mostly going to be their like young guys they've already sort of graduated on the forward bottom lines, and then also Blankenberg will get in the defensive rotation.
Yeah, one of those names that I mentioned, Luke Evangelista, he's already making an impact at the NHL level with 80 games played last season. Yeah. So I mean, like obviously he'll continue to do so. Was 6th on the team in points with 39. So he'll likely continue to be a solid contributor there. What about this line construction? I know we've sort of talked a little bit about it already, but with the additions of Stamkos and Marchessault, do you think either of them would play on the top line, or do you think both of them would go to the second line? Do you think Stamkos would take O'Reilly's spot as the number 1 center? How do you think things will shake out on those top lines?
I'd say there's probably a chance Stamkos will play on the top line, but I think more likely both him and Marchessault are going to be on the second line. I think they can both play center, but I feel like Marchessault is more of a winger, and I don't know, maybe they like someone else in that 2C spot, like a Novak or whatever. But yeah, I think probably they'll both slot in on the second line, and that top 6 is pretty good for sure. Ryan O'Reilly, Filip Forsberg, and Gustav Nyquist as a first line, and then Stamkos, Marchessault, and probably Tommy Novak as their second line. That's pretty good. That's There's a lot of, as you said, really good scoring talent there. It's kind of funny that a lot of them are kind of old, but see, I don't know. I can't really speak on their defensive games, but I think they'll be fine enough defensively. And yeah, that's some really good scoring talent, as I've said. I do think beyond that, though, I really don't love their depth, actually. I don't really know that they've got like more. As you said, Evangelista had a good year for his age, and he probably will be a good player. And I think Jankowski's okay too, but I'm not really sure that I think that they're going to put the fear of God, as it were, in other like opposing or if you like match up third line to third line, sure, they might be better than a lot of teams, but as I was saying sort of at the top of the episode, like I just don't really know that this team can hang with some of the best in the West, in their own division, or in the NHL. Maybe that's a hot take, but yeah, I think their depth forwards are kind of not necessarily a weakness, but not what you'd expect of a Stanley Cup winning team.
Yeah, I mean, the Oilers have made it work relying on those top 2 lines. Obviously Forsberg and Stamkos aren't McDavid and Draisaitl. Shout out to Draisaitl getting the bag. Speaking of, yeah, but Unreal. I mean, maybe, I think what they're relying on is that those top 2 lines will be good enough that they won't have to rely on those bottom lines, but we'll see how that shakes out. What do you think is the outlook in terms of like the standings for the Predators next season? Yeah, just give me your thoughts on that.
I think, as you said, that I think we both agree they're probably almost, I would say, over a 50% chance, maybe close to like maybe even 70% chance to make the playoffs. And they're going to be a threat in the Central. They're going to be a tough team to play. it feels like we usually struggle playing the Predators. And yeah, I think for next year they've got a good team. How that team will age, we can talk about that next offseason. But for next season, they'll be pretty good. I believe I have them third in the Central, but I think that fourth might be the more likely outcome. And I was kind of when I did my predictions this year, I was having a little bit more fun with it and got a little crazy because it's hard to predict, especially if you go chalk. So I put them third. I feel like consensus would probably have them fourth, but either way, I think they do make it above the playoff line and, are somewhere in the 90-point range, probably mid to upper 90s.
Okay. So last season, they had 99 points, fourth in the Central. They were 47, 30, and 5. I think I'm just a tad bit higher on them than you are. I would agree. I think they are going to be third in the Central, and I think that is I don't really see them finishing fourth. Is the thing. I think they're going to be third, maybe even second. Is what I think. I think they. Like I said, I don't know if that's sustainable beyond next season, but I think for next year, the Winnipeg Jets will take a big step back. And then, maybe they could outperform the likes of Dallas or Colorado. I don't think they'll be able to outperform both necessarily, but I think third is where I would put them. I think we could have had, thrown them in the discussion for next week's episode where we talk about those three teams that were at the top of the Central last season. But obviously there was a lot more to talk about with the Predators offseason, and that's why we're getting to it today. But I think they are more likely, in my opinion, going to finish in sort of that upper 90s, low hundreds point range, maybe even to close to 110 or something like that. So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, I guess I might be a tad bit higher on them than you are. Which is fine. We don't have to agree on everything, Alec. It's okay. So that's the Predators. Anything else you want to add on them before we move on to this next team?
Actually, I do. I did forget to mention this. I do think a strength of this team will be their special teams. I think they have a really good special teams roster, especially. I think there's a chance that first power play could be number one in the league.
I was gonna say
it's really scary. To be honest, those are that top unit should be O'Reilly in front of the goal. You got Forsberg and maybe Stamkos on the other side, and then rotate in Marchessault or Josi, or you can get Nyquist in there. That's kind of stupid good.
Yeah, that's wild.
And I think their penalty kill is actually pretty good. They've usually had a pretty good penalty kill in special teams coaching, and their defensive roster, just their blue line pairings, I think aren't the most exciting on paper, but they just always do the job. And I actually kind of like their depth. I don't know. So I think they'll have a good penalty kill, and I think they have a chance to really, really shine on the power play.
Yeah, having an elite goalie also helps on the penalty kill for sure. Yeah, for sure. I agree. That first power play unit looks kind of insane. One thing I do want to mention that we maybe should have done this last week's episode, but we can do today is sort of talking about when the Blues will play the Predators this season. I think looking at the schedule, unless I'm missing something, I believe the first time they'll meet is December 27th. And that will be in St. Louis, and then they won't see them again until March, where they play them 3 times in a week and a half.
Oh boy!
So if there is a bit of a playoff race in the Central Division, and the Predators and Blues are both kind of in it, that's going to be interesting. They play them in Nashville on March 18th. In St. Louis on March 23rd, and then in Nashville on March 27th. So that'll be sort of towards the end of the season. And if there's a bit of a race in the Central Division, that could be an interesting week. You never know.
I already don't have a good feeling about that week. This team is
Um,
so good at being our heel.
yeah. Also, that week we face in that like 2 week stretch. Those last 2 weeks of March, we also face the Canucks and the Avs. So that'll be
Fun
fun.
stuff.
That'll be
That'll
maybe a
be our
rough
race to
stretch.
claim the President's Trophy. Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. So that's the Nashville Predators. That's sort of our preview of the Preds. Let's move on now to the Utah Hockey Club. Sort of I think one of the better off seasons as well. Both of these teams did a lot. They were pretty active this offseason in terms of improving for the 2024-25 season. So obviously, the Arizona Coyotes have come under new ownership and relocated to Utah. And it seems like right away they're taking steps forward, taking steps in the right direction. Where a lot of the action was for Utah was on the blue line. They sort of overhauled that defense, moving some players out and other players in. They're hoping that some younger players will take some steps forward, and that this is a year that maybe they could snag one of those wild card spots. So let's dive in with the sort of the subtractions first. Leaving, I guess now Utah is JJ Moser, Travis Dermott, and Josh Brown, and then coming in their additions. The big one is Mikhail Sergachev, as well as John Marino and Ian Cole. Are there any other names that you think are notable that went in or out? I think those are the main ones, if not the only ones. What did you think of Utah's offseason?
I think they had a pretty exciting offseason, a very exciting draft night.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I I think this team, I don't know, maybe they are getting too much hype going into the season, but I think this team is going to be scrappy, and I think they actually have a chance to be pretty good. They've just got a lot of like solid enough pieces with a couple guys that actually are like top NHL talent, not like top 10 or 15, but top 100 players, maybe even top 50 players. And they kind of have like everything you want in a good NHL roster. So I actually think they are going to potentially make a run at it this year to make the playoffs, not the cup. Um so yeah, I would say they had a good offseason, just with the one, I guess destruction of the Arizona Coyotes whole thing.
Yeah,
A unfortunate situation there. I guess us being St. Louis fans were familiar with losing a team, and it's not fun, and so it's really unfortunate for Arizona hockey fans who actually I think they had a really good fan base, and
for
that's
sure.
really I yeah, I was pretty mad at the league, I guess, when they let all that happen, but moving forward, moving off that, I think the Utah team and their new fan base will be good this coming season.
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope Arizona gets another team because I think hockey should work there. Like it's a good city for sports. Um, but I am excited to see hockey in Utah. It sort of makes sense as a hockey place. I feel like
Just
good sports
please
fans there
get
as
a
well.
real name and
Oh my
logo.
goodness, have we talked about this already?
I don't think so. I'm
That
really upset by the fact that they're the hockey, like, yeah.
well, yeah, I I would rather them like take their time and get it right than like rush it for next
Yes.
season and pick a dumb name. I If Utah Hockey Club is like the long term name, that's so dumb. I think I may have mentioned it before. I like the Outlaws. I think it'd be really cool to see the like the themes of like the Wild West and like all that mixing into hockey. I feel like that'd be kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
But none of this like Utah Venom or Frost. Like I don't know. I'm not a fan of that stuff. Also, like if they do anything like winter weathery, I feel like they're so close to the Abs that it's sort of like
Right.
a repeat of that sort of theme. Um, Anyways, we're getting off topic here. Obviously, well, I guess this is a big part of the team identity. So anyways, let's talk about some of their top players, starting with the forward group again. Obviously, someone like Clayton Keller is going to be the top player.
Oh yeah.
He had 37 goals and 49 assists last year for 86 points. He played all 82 games, so really cool to see the young guy step forward and lead the team in points like that. Who are some other names that you like among the forward group that you think could be exciting to watch next season?
I mean, Logan Cooley, also Clayton Keller, St. Louis native. I mean, Logan Cooley is kind of their other forward. That's really exciting. You know, he's got the draft pedigree. I want to say he went 4th overall a couple of years ago. But an exciting player and really kind of a burgeoning young star.
He went 3rd overall.
3rd over. Okay. Right, because Shane Wright was 4th, which was kind of surprising. And then Schmaltz is their other like kind of star forward. Those 3 guys I think will probably make up the top line, I would guess. Yeah, and it's a good top line. They're all good players.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm excited to see another full season of Clayton Keller. See, what he can become or I guess continue to do. And then Logan Cooley. I'd be excited to see him produce at the NHL level. Moving now to the defenseman group. This is sort of like I mentioned when we first started talking about them. This is where a lot of the shakeup was. So who do you see as the top defenseman? Do you think it's going to be Sergachev right away? Do you think there's any other names in that discussion? What are your thoughts on the blue line?
I think it's probably Sergachev. As I said, this is kind of like, it feels like a roster with a lot of like pieces, like complementary pieces that you want on a team. I do think Sergachev is their number 1 guy, though. I think he's definitely going to lead the team in points ahead of a Sean Dursey or I mean, I don't even know who would be in contention there. Offensive defenseman and still not too old, although it feels like he's been in the league a while. I think he's like 27.
He is, hold on, wait for it, 26. Just turned 26 this summer.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, it feels like he's been in the league forever, and maybe it's just the scourge of the Lightning, but he's good at hockey and can score some goals and net some points. So, yeah, I would say Dursey's the other one, though. I guess one maybe not quite as exciting part of their roster is the back end of their defense. They've got a bunch of okay players. Ian Cole's actually someone I kind of like more than I should, honestly. That's just a flaw of mine. But, yeah, I would say that top pairing is really solid.
For sure. Sergachev has been around a while. He played, well, I guess he only played 4 games in 2016-17, but he was 18 years old, played 4 games for Montreal. And then the following season, 27-2018, when he was 19 years old, played 79 games for the Lightning. So he has been around for a while, but he started out very young. So I think I'd agree that he'll probably be the top guy on the blue line. Talk to me a little bit about the goalie situation, because I think this is maybe where the discussion gets a little more interesting. You mentioned pre-show that you think it could be an even split, like a 50-50 tandem kind of situation. So tell me some of your thoughts on the goalie situation in Utah.
I actually am kind of a Connor Vamilka like supporter. I think he's pretty underrated. Excuse me. I don't know. He just has been pretty good on some really, really bad, then Coyotes teams with really like no help in front of him. And he's been, as I said, pretty okay. I think I'm excited about the upside of Vamilka. And Connor Ingram up to this point, I think I'm a lot less excited for just with his like track record and I guess you could say profile up to this point. I think he's a fine backup to maybe even an above average backup, because there's some, tandems who really only have one guy. And Connor Ingram should be a good enough backup. But I would say if not a 50-50 split, and Vejmelka isn't the player I see him as and is more of just a, decent NHL goalie, then it will be a split. But I'd be keeping my eyes out to see maybe even like a 55-45 or 60-40 in favor of Vejmelka.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think I'm a little bit the other way around, where I think Connor Ingram might be the name to watch for. It's definitely an interesting discussion. Just going off of last year, let's see, let me get the stat pulled up here. Just looking at goals saved above expected, which is a stat that I like to bring up a lot, especially when looking at Jordan Bennington because he did so well last year. But in 50 games for Connor Ingram last year, he had 8.3 goals saved above expected, which was 21st overall. And then scrolling all the way down to 84th. Vejmelka had, let's see, minus 6.7 goals saved above expected. So I don't know. I think it is an interesting discussion, and it probably will be a pretty even split. And I'll be interested to see how it plays out in Utah in the crease there.
I think you can say with these two that their goalie tandem shouldn't be a weakness, which it kind of had been in the just the rosters previously. The Coyotes had been just so dearth of talent, and now like there's just so many spots where they've just got like solid to good players with higher potential, and I feel like that is also the case with the goalies.
Yeah. There's something weird happening here. Sorry, just using that goals saved above expected metric. I got that from Money Puck. They said Connor Ingram played 50 and Vejmelka played 27, but then Hockey Reference says that Vejmelka played 50 and Connor Ingram played 27. So one of them played 50 last year, the other played 27.
I'm almost certain it was Vejmelka.
played 50.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So maybe some of those goals saved above expected numbers would shift. I'm not sure what the issue is there, but I still do like Connor Ingram to maybe take a step forward. I think he is 1 year younger, so they're both not quite in that sweet spot in terms of goalie production of like late 20s, early 30s. So hypothetically, they would both continue to progress. So that will be interesting to see. As I said. Speaking of young players, let's talk about their prospect system. I'm getting better at these segues.
Every episode.
I think their prospect system is pretty solid. I think it's like in the top 10 of the league, at least. Maybe even I don't know if I'd put it top 5, but I think somewhere between 5 and 10 is maybe what I'd say. As we've already mentioned, Logan Cooley is a pretty exciting name. Dylan Guenther, obviously they just drafted TJ Ginla this year, who I think you liked quite a bit. So talk to me about their prospect system, some of the names you like, and whether or not you think any of these young prospects could have a significant impact in 2024-25.
Yeah, I think they do have a pretty good farm system, and I think they got a lot of. I would agree that it's definitely probably top 5 to top 10 range rather than like a true top 5 prospect pool. Anyways, that's just repeating what you just said. Yeah. For next season, I guess you could see a lot of these guys come up and play. I think their bottom 6 isn't exactly set. It's hard to say exactly who. Maybe someone like an Igor Sokolov, or I don't know, someone else they like. But I think you could probably see some minor to, I don't know, maybe upwards of like 40 games played for some of these guys. Mm-hmm. Although I don't know if I expect any of them to make a pretty big impact in that role. But I do think they, as I said, like have some interesting names, and definitely like it's a pretty good prospect pool now that I'm very excited to see grow, especially with guys like Daniil But and Dmitry Simashev, who are still definitely some years out. They're playing in the KHL too, so you got to get them to the States. But they've got some really exciting like potential, potentially very high talent, along with some solid depth to accompany it. And yeah, I think they're set up pretty well for the following years to come. For this year, I think they're probably going to be relying on, as we said, kind of that top line and top pair, as well as just everyone else to sort of pull their own weight. I don't really know if they're going to be seeing any massive impacts, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think that with a team trying to make its way out of a rebuild, type situation, I think their prospect system is pretty solid, and you'd expect it to continue to have a pretty significant impact at the NHL level. Real quick, I just checked on ESPN for the goalie situation, and it says Connor Ingram 50 games. So
that's surprising.
I know,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that. But just wanted
I will
to
hold that.
clear that up before we move any further. Yeah, like I said, I think these prospects will continue to play an important role in Utah. And do you think there's like anything of note that's going to happen on the sort of the construction of the lines and the defensive pairings, or do you think it'll be pretty much as expected? Obviously, with a team like you just said, with such like a young core, there's going to be a decent amount of shakeup, especially on those lower lines. But tell me again who you think the top line will be, and maybe even sort of some of those names on the second line, and those top defensive pairs. What do you think there?
I would say it's going to be Cooley, Keller, Schmaltz. You want to see what Cooley can do, and if he can hold up in that 1C spot. And if he does, then you could probably have someone like Barrett Hayton or Dylan Gunther maybe fill in, or I don't know, maybe move Schmaltz over to center. I don't think Cooley or Keller is a center. I would say mostly I just have like a lot of names I'm curious about and think could make an impact. I'm not really sure how it's all going to shake out.
Mm-hmm.
They just maybe they're just my kryptonite, and I'm just so fascinated by so many of their guys. But I would be, as I mentioned, I'm for some reason I like Ian Cole, and I think he could maybe see himself on their second pair by the end of the season. I think Alex Kerfoot showed a lot of exciting flashes, and if he can sort of be more consistent, I think he could potentially rise the depth chart. I mean, Nick Bukestad and Dylan Gunther are two like solid depth players. They're never really going to be super exciting, but they're good for their roles. And I guess yeah, I mean, there's just got a lot of names that are just again super intriguing.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say who exactly is going to end up where, because there's so many like what ifs with it, or not what ifs, but like so many you just kind of don't know with this teams. But I do think there's quite a few names that you could be shouting out coming into the season.
Definitely, yeah. With a team like this that's sort of on the upward trajectory, it's always cool to see how it'll shake out. We'll get to see them pretty soon here. They're the second team we play in preseason, so we'll see them in a preseason game on September 22nd, which is a Sunday. So we'll get a nice first look at them then. But then moving into the season. Just looking at the Blues schedule here, we will host them in St. Louis on November 7th. That'll be the first time we see them in regular season play. The next time we see them will be January 18th in Utah. Then again on February 2nd in Utah. And then the last time we face them will be our final game of the season, actually, April 15th in St. Louis. So 4 games there against Utah. Again, if sort of this middle tier of the Central Division of like the Preds, the Blues, and the Utah Hockey Club, if they're sort of in the playoff race, then facing Utah right at the end there could have some, I don't know, maybe some playoff implications. We'll have to see. So where do you think Utah will finish? We've sort of hinted at it a little bit already, but in terms of the Central Division itself, last season the then Arizona Coyotes finished second to last. They finished 7th in the Central Division with a record of 36, 41, and 5 and 77 points. So, it is interesting. The gap between them at 7th and the Blackhawks at 8 is pretty big. So they had 77 points. The Blackhawks had 52. And then the gap between them at 7 and the team above them at 6, the Minnesota Wild, the Wild had 87 points. So a much smaller gap to close moving up than falling further. So do you think they'll sort of take that step up, like I guess like I do, and make it into sort of that middle tier, maybe be in the hunt for a wild card by the end of the season? What is your take on sort of where Utah will end up in the Central Division?
They on last year they started out really hot and were actually in a playoff spot for like I think a month or two, and then just had like an insane losing streak and kind of never recovered. Although, yeah, the fact that they ended up where they did in the playoffs or in the overall like standings, still is kind of a credit to their ability to like fight and scrap, and now they've added guys like Sergachev and Sean Dursey too. So. I actually have this team as a playoff team. I think they're going to finish. I think probably pretty resoundingly. They're going, or I don't know if that's the right way to use that, but I would say if you ran a simulation of the season 100 times, at least 90 of them, I think they finish either 4th or 5th in the division. Just looking at the talent in the division, I don't know. Maybe I just really am a hater on the Wild, but I think it's between the Blues and the Utah Hockey Club for those 4th and 5th spots. And as I mentioned, I think the Central is going to be pretty good. And I actually, in my predictions, I had them. I had the Central coming out with 5 playoff teams and no wild cards for the Pacific. So I have them finishing 5th, and I do have them making the playoffs. I think they'll probably be around a 94-ish point team.
Okay, and you think that's enough for the playoffs? We'll have to see. So I think I definitely see like a scenario where that could happen, and I don't dispute that at all. I might be like a little bit lower on them. I think 5th is sort of reasonable to expect. Maybe like 90 to 94 range. It's totally reasonable. I do think they will take a step up. They might be passing the Blues. It's just, I think, let's see, the Dallas Stars, I think will stay at the top. Same case with the Colorado Avalanche. I think the Preds move up into like top 3 in the Central, as I already mentioned. I do think the Jets take a step back. It's just a question of how big a step back. And this is going to be a discussion for next week, of course. But I don't see the Utah Hockey Club passing them. So I'm comfortable with saying that they'll finish 5th in the Central Division, which I guess would have me putting the Blues at 6th. But oh well. I guess if I'm going realistic here and not sticking to my bold prediction of the Blues getting to 98 points and making the playoffs, thinking more realistically on that side of things, I think that 5th in the Central and maybe a wild card spot could be realistic for the Utah Hockey Club. So we'll have to wait and see how it always plays out.
Do you think they make the playoffs? If they do end up finishing 5th and battling for that second wild card, they'd be in contention. You assume Edmonton and Vancouver are probably going to take the Pacific. But of the remaining teams, you've got Vegas, LA, maybe Seattle, Anaheim, or Calgary, but Vegas and LA really feel like kind of a step above the other two, and one of those teams is going to get the 3rd Pacific spot. So between your, I guess, least favorite of those two, do you think Utah has the gall to stand up and take a playoff spot from them? As I mentioned, I already do.
You already do. I do not. I think that they'll be. I do think they'll be like one of the first teams out, sort of like the Blues were this year. I think I think it just boils down to how bad the Jets are. Honestly, I think
You're really low on the Jets, huh?
I guess I am. I mean, I think they may have overperformed a bit last year, and this is a discussion for next week. But I do think I think my prediction for Utah would be that they just miss. They just miss the playoffs. I think it's pretty likely that either LA or Vegas gets one of the one of the wild card spots, and then I think I would agree that the others would go to the central teams, but we'll see. We'll just have to wait and see. I think I'll stick with Utah being one of the first teams to miss out on the playoffs. But I'm excited to see. I mean, I wouldn't say that I dislike Utah. I mean, you feel for the team after all they went through in Arizona. So I guess I am sort of excited to see how they'll progress. I hope the Blues progress more or progress better in the long term. But we'll have to wait and see sort of what the situation is as the season plays out. And we're gonna track all of that here on Note News. And so if you want to follow along as the season approaches, another killer segue. So if you wanna follow along, so we're in the home stretch, like I mentioned. We're really getting close to the season here. We're gonna start breaking down preseason games once those start happening. We've got some guests coming on to Note News confirmed in September, and so stay tuned for that. So the best way to do that is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Note News Pod to follow along with us there. That's where we'll post any news, anything like that before we would drop an episode. So make sure to follow along with us there. And then a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to Note News would go a long way as well. We also really appreciate if you would share Note News with your friends. So it's a long-winded way of saying we appreciate everything and hope you all keep it up. So that'll do it for this episode of Note News. We'll see you next time. And as always, let's go Blues.
Let's go Blues.